communication. For consumption and production. And as you hear, this session is going to be recorded. So if you don't want your face on the screen, please make sure that you put your camera off. Also, we ask you to please keep your microphones muted at all time. So whenever it's time to speak, you can just get the words from the chair of the session. And you can always type in your questions, comments, ideas, and suggestions in the chat. We'll be following that up. And I'm pretty sure our speakers will do their best to answer to all your queries. That said, I just want to welcome you all again to the fourth session of this online conference. And without further ado, I will pass it on to the chair. Claire, the floor is yours.
Thanks ever so much. So I am Claire Hoolohan. I'm based at the University of Manchester, and welcome to today's session. We're talking about visions, narratives and designs, and we've got a group of us that have come from the social change working group of the Systems for Sustainable Consumption and Production. So here we have got 4 presentations focused on different participatory methods for thinking about futures of sustainable consumption, and particularly thinking about futures in kind of a systemic or practice-oriented way that decenters kind of individual action and thinks more about collective action, social change, systems of production and consumption. All these words that are very familiar with us, but hopefully we'll see some unpacking of these terms and ideas from our different speakers. We've got 4 talks. We'll follow a fairly ordinary sort of conference format, if you like. We've got 15 minutes of presentation followed by 5 minutes Q&A for each speaker, and hopefully we're down to about 5 minutes at the end, but hopefully we'll have time to just reflect across the presentations a little at the end too. I just echo everything that Janine has just said. Feel free to participate in your own way here. This is a nice cozy group of us. We'll look forward to a lively discussion, but you can participate by putting a question in the chat, flagging with your actual hand, I'll probably see it, or giving me a virtual hand if not, and we'll do as much as we can to bring everybody possible into this conversation with us. Hopefully you're looking forward to this as much as I am. So without further ado, we'll continue on to our our first speaker, which will be Marlyne. I'll allow you to introduce yourself as you like and crack on with your talk if you like, Marlyne.
Great, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, so delighted to be here. Marlyne Sahakian at the University of Geneva in the Sociology Department, and with me on the call today is PhD candidate Orlane Moina. Some other members of our team contributed to this presentation but couldn't be with us. And what we wanted to do with you this afternoon is share a process that we went through to reinterpret energy scenarios from the future into personas. And it involved a transdisciplinary, transdisciplinary process. So the starting point of the project is the realization that citizens indeed have a role to play in the energy transition. And yet, when it comes to how people might vote in such a transition in Switzerland, it has been quite catastrophic. And one of the reasons maybe why people are not keen on, I don't know, carbon emission taxes or other policy aspects that could be favorable to an energy transition is that perhaps they cannot project themselves into this future that we are proposing. And here on the right, you have an image that is taken out of one of our policy documents that shows what the energy transition is supposed to look like in Switzerland. And they've tried to illustrate it for us, right? I mean, there are more efficient buildings and modes of transport, more renewable energies, but where are the social relations? Where are the people in these futures? And what does everyday life look like in these futures? So this was the starting point for us, that somehow we needed to reinterpret policy scenarios that could become more meaningful for everyday people or citizens. So there are 2 main questions to the research project. The first is more of a methodological question. It's the one that I'm going to detail today. It's about making scenarios more relatable to people. But ultimately, the scenarios that we have developed are being used currently in citizen dialogues And more precisely, they are meant to introduce a new form of reflexivity around the trade-offs and co-benefits of the good life and energy reductions. So they become a form of photo-elicitation, if you will, to prompt these discussions. And I can't go into too much detail because we're now analyzing the results of the workshops, but we might be able to give you some insight into this during the Q&A. So we wanted to take a bit of time to just present our conceptual framework. On the one hand, we are very much inspired by future studies, this idea that the future is quite open, that how we represent the future has implications today, and therefore is performative today, and that utopia is not necessarily a blueprint or an aim, but rather a method that we engage with. In addition to that, we are very much inspired by social practice theory, recognizing that many of the habitual and routinized aspects of everyday life are embedded not only in material arrangements, but also normative expectations of how things ought or should be. And I won't detail it as much in this presentation, but we also were drawing on human needs theories to understand well-being. I'll come back to that in a moment. So how do we bring those two main theoretical inspirations together, and how do they inform the methods that we engaged with? So there's at least three ways, in our opinion, maybe you have some others, in three ways in which social practices relate to social futures. So the first is that if you want to describe a future, social practice theory is useful because it gets to descriptions that are rather thick descriptions that say something about how people perform practices in relation to material arrangements, but also in relation to changed meanings in that future. So that probably is the most obvious way in which these two concepts intersect. The two other ones are interrelated. The second point is that social practices today include teleaffectivities, and therefore they are also tending towards a future, because whether you are riding a bike or preparing a meal or doing any number of mundane activities, you have certain goals, expectations, aspirations, longings in mind that are future-oriented. And then going from the future backwards, deliberations about the future can perhaps create moments of reflexivity in the present that could change current practices. And we're not able to prove this with the project, but it is something conceptually that is could be interesting to explore. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now just describing that first point, how we got at futures that represent social practices. We took energy scenarios that exist in Switzerland, we complemented them with some other promising energy scenarios, and we looked at different categories that are represented in those scenarios, like heating and cooling, food, mobility, living, working, a whole number of categories. We then interpreted them as future practices, and we tried to think not only about what it means to, how people might be wearing warmer clothes inside, or how they might be engaging in different skills and competencies to, let's say, close blinds during the day in a particularly hot summer, but we really tried to detail those elements of practices to think about skills, competencies, changes to material arrangements, but also changes to meanings and teleaffectivities in the future. Once we came up with these future practices, we realized that we had to backtrack a little bit and represent the different changes that might have taken place to arrive at those reinterpretations of energy scenarios. So to come up with those changes, we drew from the literature. So we looked at the degrowth literature, sustainable consumption literature for promising ideas. We also drew on our own research projects, and we discussed these promising ideas with experts that are listed here on the right, and also submitted the final scripts to a citizen workshop to be discussed. Based on all of that feedback, we have finalized 5 personas that live together in one future that represents the path to net zero emissions in 2050. These these characters are living in 2035. They're situated in Geneva. They represent different socioeconomic groups. And as you can see on these images, they also represent different domains of consumption and different areas of work life. And what I want to detail now are, I want to take you sort of behind the scenes to show you everything we learned in this process methodologically. So one thing we learned, and I have to also thank some of the people on this call because we were very much, the project was enriched by prior discussions that we've had with some of you. Well, we realized that when you represent a slice of life, it is very important to avoid an over-individualized representation of the future. And so rather than only present social practices, we had to describe changes to systems of provision that happen in a collective sphere and that would allow some forms of individual consumption to be more possible and probable than others. So on the right here, you have an excerpt from one of the personas. In this future, all schools in Geneva have switched to vegetarian menus some years ago. Alternatives to meat-based protein are being developed and experimented with. And this therefore relates to the food category, but we also showed how work time reductions might have become normal in the future. The sharing of different appliances in spaces at a building level, changes in employment opportunities, etc. So all of these elements had to come in to sort of shed light on the systems of provision at play in these futures. Meanings were also showing how new meanings might have emerged in the future was also something we wanted to put forward. So here on the right, you have the example of an elderly couple living in 2035 in Geneva that have credit on the amount of air conditioning they can use. But they also have a new word that they use for some of their appliances. They are energivorous. And so there's perhaps a new vocabulary that emerges in these futures that reflects new meanings around consumption, not only in relation to energy usage here, but also new meanings and expectations around collective work, around heating bodies rather than spaces, around the limits to long distance travel, the idea of meat as a treat, etc. On this slide, I wanted to show you one of the biases that we recognized in this process as a research team. We were quite dismayed to find that many Swiss energy scenarios did not tackle the question of energy sufficiency at all. And therefore, we tried to make energy sufficiency quite prominent. But in the first versions of our personas, we had very low-tech futures, and we were challenged on this by citizens and our expert groups. And we needed to reintroduce efficiency measures, but also more renewable energy production, including prosumption. Explicitly, people asked us to also put in more props from the future. And this was a challenge because we wanted these props to nonetheless remain somehow meaningful and within the range of what could be possible. So here on the right, you have that same elderly gentleman who is wearing his virtual reality helmet and has put on his cooling shirt in order to stay cool and be entertained. And this gets to this idea of how to represent futures that are not only utopic, not dystopic, and finding the right balance, which we found was a bit of a challenge. In relation to that and about these utopic futures, just a reminder that the overall aim of these personas is not to come with a blueprint of the future, but to use them in workshops, as we've been doing, to discuss the trade-offs between saving energy and the good life. And so for the good life, we engage with a list of human needs. This is the list developed by Antonietta Di Giulio, Enrico De Fila. There are many others. And we knew that this was the overall goal that we wanted to attain, discussing well-being in relation to energy reductions. And so in the representations of these futures, we had to be careful not to make well-being so explicit, since it's something that we wanted to be discussed. It came out very clearly in the first drawings of the personas. They were all very happy people living in this energy future, and we had to tone down these subjective representations of well-being by not having overtly happy people, for example. Another thing we did with these futures that was quite challenging was to quantify the exact energy savings represented by each persona. And we did so by income quintile. And we also have to admit that so far this information is very difficult for people to digest. And we have to think of ways of making this information more accessible. But ultimately, it does raise attention to the fact that not all people consume the same way today, and therefore will not be changing their practices in the same way in the future. So what's next? We've already done participatory workshops where we've consulted some 55 citizens. We've done another style of workshop with energy professionals. So overall, we've reached over 100 people in Geneva, with a smaller cohort in Basel, the second city in Switzerland. And we are just now analyzing the results. And like I said in the Q&A with Orlan, who's here, maybe we can give you a bit more feedback. But one initial feedback we can say is that the cartoons are very effective in getting people to engage with this question of do energy futures represent the good life? And indeed, participating in itself is a way of meeting human needs. So people really did feel that they were contributing to society with these discussions. So finally, as for our discussion, to sort of summarize this methodological paper or contribution, if you will, is that we realized that for ourselves also as a research team, coming up with representations of energy scenarios in the future is a practice, and it came with our own activities around how to be engaged in such a process. So we really did learn quite a lot along the way, and it was necessary to consult with different actors to challenge our own assumptions. To a certain extent, I don't think we've perfectly managed to do that. There's probably still a lot of biases in these futures, but ultimately the goal, as I've said, is not to present one valid future that everyone must adhere to, but rather use utopia as a method, or some combination of utopia and dystopia as a method, by having these personas represent changes in future institutions, social relations, material arrangements, etc., that allow us to then discuss today whether such futures are worth it and how we might strive towards them individually and collectively. Thank you so much. I hope I'm doing okay on time.
Thank you so much. It was beautifully self-managed there to the second, I would say. So yeah, I've added to the chat just to say you are welcome to drop your questions into the chat, or otherwise you can raise a hand or give me a wave if you've got a camera on. Would anyone like to kick us off? Yeah, go on then, Stephen.
Hello, thank you, Marlyne. Very, very interesting talk. Just maybe a bit more, if you could expand on when you were doing the workshops, you said you were getting a little bit of pushback in terms of not being high-tech enough, or that you had a bit of a low-tech kind of view on things. What could you explain a little bit more about that? And how do you see these workshops connecting maybe a bit with kind of policies, or have you thought about the idea of, kind of backcasting from these social, practice futures into a more concrete sort of plan for policy?
Yes, thank you. So for the first part of the question, I have two insights to share. The first is that the project is funded by the Federal Office of Energy. And in fact, the term sufficiency, I went back and looked, was not really central to our proposal. So we ended up wanting to introduce it in these scenarios, but we got pushback also from the funders. The funder who rightly said, okay, we're happy that you've now given a lot more prominence to sufficiency in your particular representations of these energy scenarios through personas, but what has happened to renewable energy production? What has happened to more efficiency measures? And indeed, around the same time, the IPCC reports, the sixth assessment report came out showing that all three measures are necessary, and so we had to rebalance our stories to present this more holistic approach to energy reduction that would include renewables, efficiency, and sufficiency. But we also got pushback from citizens who, when you tell them you're looking at the future, they wanted to see something that seemed futuristic. And that was challenging for us, and particularly for the cartoonist that we worked with, because he was saying, how can I represent things that don't exist? So we had to sort of play a little bit on the fact that certainly today you can get heating gloves and heating socks, for example. Well, in the future, could you have cooling shirts? And so we introduced props that seemed more or less plausible, but we didn't push it too far either, because we wanted these personas to be relatable. And your second question again was?
It's about the workshops, and if there's any sort of plans to connect it to, besides just getting reactions, but sort of thinking about policies or backcasting from those sort of futures or something like this.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So the workshops have 3 phases. In a first phase, people look at the personas and they ask, do these personas represent the good life? In a second phase, they look at the energy savings associated with the personas, and they answer the question, are the energy savings worth it in relation to the good life? And then in the third phase, they're asked, okay, to achieve energy reductions and the good life, how do we get there? And what can you imagine? And we tell them explicitly not to come up with individual solutions, but to think about collective solutions that have to be organized either at the level of citizen collectives, neighborhoods, and all the way up to the state. So yeah, implicit, I guess, in our design, workshop design, is this idea of teasing out the changes that might have to occur.
Very cool, thanks.
We've got time for one more very quick question. Ali, do you want to get your slides up while we go? Perhaps we'll go over to Maury.
Oh, great, Claire. Thank you very much. Hi, Marlyne. Good to see you again. And
Hi, Maury.
So my question is in part motivated by something I read yesterday about how the kind of contemporary discourse on well-being and by extension notions of a good life, have become kind of co-opted by the self-help industry, and have kind of led to a kind of nihilism. And maybe I'm over-interpreting here a little bit, but as I was reading this, I was thinking specifically about the work that you have done over the years and colleagues with you. And so I'm curious as to, in your focus groups and interviews and so forth as part of this, whether your respondents are able to articulate a sort of sense of collective well-being, or whether these conversations tend to focus on a more sort of individualistic interpretation.
Thank you, Maury. I think it has to do with the design of the workshop. We explicitly steer people away from more individual approaches to interpreting well-being. We also explain that we are not so much interested in more subjective understandings of well-being, such as happiness. We tell them that this is important, but that we are working with an approach to well-being that relies on this idea of protected needs that can be protected by society and therefore planned for by society. So it's the way that we frame well-being, I think, that leads to interpretations that are more collectively oriented. Not to say that, Hoolohan, you can jump in if you like. There have been discussions at tables where people are expressing individual and more individual sentiment, but the way we steer the conversation is really aimed at exactly challenging this idea of over-individualizing well-being.
And if I can quickly just add one thing is that, so when they discuss the needs, they also, so there are some needs that are more collectively turned than others, identity or whatever that is more individual than affection, for example, or any else. But also they talk about the ways of satisfying those needs, and most of the time they're collective ways and collective alternatives to satisfying those needs, whatever they are. So yeah, that's the way I think the design, as you said, is taking them, but also they like and they come to discuss more collective ways of satisfying the needs most of the time.
Fabulous. Thank you, Marlyne. And
Thank you.
Erik. And thank you, Stephen and Maury, for your questions as well. We're going to move over to Henrique now, if that's all right. Henrique, you're all right to share your slides?
Yep.
Fabulous.
Share the screen.
Yeah, perfect. All right, over to you, Henrique.
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Henrique. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Industrial Design at the TU Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And my work situates at the touching points of social science and design research. And it focuses specifically on the role of technology designers and how to help them to get a better grip on the societal effects of their design decisions and to reflect on their own practices through research. And this talk focuses on my recent work around futures of summer comfort in Dutch households, which I use as a case to further develop these design methods and theories and reflections. So the work is part of a 3-year fellowship funded within the Dutch Research Council's talent scheme for applied and engineering sciences. And within this scheme, projects collaborate with a so-called user committee. And I've listed the members of my user committee here. So as you can see, it's quite a diverse group of stakeholders, which all in some way have something to do with this topic of summer comfort. And as I said, I mainly focus on industry partners. So for example, the heat pump and ventilation brand, or the domestic shading trade organization and the bedroom furniture brand. But I also work with more societal partners, such as the Klimaatverbond and the social housing provider. In addition to this, I've also joined several communities of practice during the project because I started to publish on this topic and I was asked to join these groups. And these are communities of practice around the topic of futures of summer comfort in the Netherlands, which are led by partly by industry and also partly by policy stakeholders. So in this talk, I reflect on a series of collaborations with technology developers in which we developed design fictions around summer comfort, with the aim of decentralizing technological innovation and challenging the techno-hedonist persona. So I will first offer some brief background on this topic of summer comfort and the design brief and methods that were used, and then introduce a couple of examples of these design fictions, and then close briefly with some of the implications and effects that these might have. So as in other places, the experience and anticipation of climate change is leading to a strong growth in the sales and use of air conditioning in the Netherlands, which in turn leads to sharp increases in domestic energy demand, not only during heat waves, but actually in a much larger period of the year. It's becoming clear now. So to gain a better understanding of these developments and the role that technology design plays in it, the project began with a qualitative field study into expected futures in this domain. So a field study, but a future-oriented one. But the study involved households as well as domain experts and focused on the question where practices, so also in this study, social practices was very present and found really useful. So practices relevant for summer comfort, which include cooling and ventilating, but also eating, sleeping, entertaining, etc. And to inquire where these are currently heading in the Dutch household sector. So of course, this is going to be a generalization, but I managed to speak to 21 very different households. So we try to maximize the diversity within this group, as well as 10 experts. And main conclusions of this study were that while people have a wide diversity of responses to warmer weather, the presence of artificial cooling, so air conditioning or other forms, hampers the development of low energy means of summer comfort, such as, for example, they were already mentioned by Marlyne earlier, using shading or night ventilation, but also acclimatizing. So this is a form of physical adaptation to heat. This is not just because these other strategies take effort, but also because the presence of artificial cooling makes them more difficult to perform. Okay, so then I wanted to zoom in further on the role of technology development in these changes and these anticipated changes in the future. And what is apparent in the future visions that dominate in specifically the industrial visions of the future home around summer comfort is the presence of what Grande et al. Refer to as a techno-hedonist persona. So this is an imagined user who prefers customized, pleasurable experiences that require low effort and little time investment. So in other words, a continuation of business as usual in spite of global warming. So this is really when you go, for example, to technology fairs in the HVAC industry, this is the kind of picture that emerges quite strongly. And it's illustrated in these two pictures, but there's much more to it, of course. So while this persona is dominant in industry, it's much less present in the households that I encountered in my study. So the mismatch between imagined and actual people, combined with the apparent attraction of domestic cooling, does steer summer comfort into energy-intensive forms of dependence on artificial cooling, which could lead to increased energy demand as well as inequality issues. So as we know from earlier research, future visions are performative. Marlyne also mentioned it. And because practices and technologies co-evolve, technology design is a player in this complex dynamic. And design is deeply involved in these processes, both in creating future visions as well as materializing them to products that then end up in people's everyday lives. But as I argue, design could also play a role in what John Urry refers to as democratizing these futures, or in other words, diversifying them. To challenge and diversify the dominant performative vision of the techno-hedonist, I worked together with stakeholders and industrial design students to create 16 design fictions that flesh out alternative futures of summer comfort. And design fictions are suitable for this type of activity because they decentralize technological innovation and rather focus on narrative explorations in which artifacts play a supporting rather than a leading role, or maybe no role at all. Or as you can see in some of the ones we made, it does play a central role, but then in a critical way. This set of design fictions was published in a report which featured in several national and local media outputs. And report also offers further explanation of the approaches used to challenge the techno-hedonist persona. But as you can see here in the list of methods, practices played an important role here. And I don't really have time to go deeper into these methods, but if you have questions about them, please go to the report or ask them after this talk. So what I want to highlight here is that based on the findings from the earlier study, I integrated a persona in the briefs for this design fiction exercise that is in many ways opposite to the techno-hedonist, in the sense of a person that is willing and able to invest effort, to learn new skills, and to change their expectations of comfort and normal living with a changing climate. So this is not very dissimilar in a sense to the people that I encountered in households. So that would maybe reduce the friction a little bit. But on the other hand, the fictions are deliberately provocative. So here you see a few simple examples. And as you can see, they are provocative. Technology is maybe decentralized or not even mentioned, as in the one on living at night. Yeah, they are clearly fictive and require quite intensive changes to everyday life. And I will now highlight three examples in a little more detail that dealt with the brief in different ways. The first I want to mention is urban camping, which is focused on the issue of overheated city apartments and explored an alternative of living and working outdoors as a new normal. It's a high-end kit consisting of sheets of fabric, various elements to attach it to different objects and things, like power cords to allow for the use of the laptop. And while being outdoors, the apartments of the people using it are imagined to be locked up and shaded, so they remain as cool as possible during for evening rest. So UrbiCamp was designed to trigger discussions around inequalities, the role of bodies and appliances in indoor overheating, and highlighted the importance of public space in dealing with hot weather. And the students in this project also created a simple physical prototype, which allowed them to create a performance around the fiction. And so by performing UrbiCamping in a fictive future scenario, in which an ethnographer tags along with two routinized practitioners, the students enriched their scenario with possible experiences of UrbiCampers. And these insights were then processed into a fictive magazine article, and I have it here. So it was really printed as an article. Yeah, that forms part of the design fiction. So UrbiCamp challenges the techno-hedonist scenario by imagining creative adjustments to in the face of challenging circumstances, which creates a whole different set of design opportunities around summer comfort that's very different from a response towards creating cooling and even efficient cooling, as well as knowledge and skills that are accessible to anyone. Cooling Patch is a fictive product that contains micro needles which painlessly release the magic Keep Cool technology into the blood, which makes the body more resistant to heat and cools it from the inside. So in this scenario, the cooling patches are provided for free, but have a range of quite impactful side effects. So Cooling Patch challenges the techno-hedonist scenario not by being non-technological, but actually by being hyper-technological and extrapolating it into an ultimately high-tech response to global warming. So as such, it exposes inequalities in access to heat mitigation means, and upon reflection, has potential to create pressing issues of dependence on a cooling technology. On the other hand, it highlights the natural bodily capacity to adjust to higher temperatures over time. Also, without Keep Cool technology, human bodies can actually adjust to higher temperatures through acclimatization. And the illustrations and stories were supplemented with a physical prototype. And I also have that here. It was really, of course, it doesn't work, which some people were very frustrated about when they saw it in an exhibition. But this really formed a really interesting set of objects to talk to. So I don't know how good I am with time, Claire?
You have just 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. I will skip the last example, but I will just show it very quickly. That was a living shirt that we made. But I wanted to then use the last bit of time to reflect very briefly on the effects of these design fictions, because in the end, I developed them together and I closely involved my partners. But in the end, we want to get to designs that are more realistic. So, but I am noticing through these exercises a change in attitude among those partners. So rather than a focus on providing a fixed comfort zone year-round, which you can see here requires heating in winter and cooling in summer, they're becoming more open to the idea of supporting people to adapt to changing climate conditions. So as illustrated here, this seemingly minor change in the assumed role of end users has potential to make a large difference in levels of energy demand for indoor climate control. So there's much more to say here. And I wanted to really briefly give a glimpse of what we are working on right now in terms of energy interfaces. So for example, thermostats nowadays, they are focused on setting a temperature for your room. And an alternative could be to have comfort zones that you implement in your thermostat. Another alternative that we are thinking about is a thermostat that is anticipatory and helps you think about the effects of applying shading or ventilating in your house and the temperatures that this might lead to indoors. So I guess to close, I would say that these design fictions are created together with practice stakeholders, but maybe more than that, they are also used to trigger a different way of thinking among this group which tends to think in a techno-solutionist manner through workshops, talks, reports, exhibitions, and media outputs. So these triggering fictions open up new avenues for actual technological innovation that consider a different kind of end user and good life, in which people are willing and able to invest time and effort to learn new skills and to change their expectations of comfort and normal living with a changing climate. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lenneke. This was fantastic. The cooling patch made me actually shudder. The thought of that is horrendous. Yeah. Would anyone like to kick us off with a question for Lenneke? I have dozens. I can jump in with some chair's privilege. Have we got any hands? All right, I'll go first while people gather their thoughts. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about who has participated to date in this research.
In the sense of, so I spoke to 21 different households, so that's one of the ways in which people participated, and they were not only filling in like workbooks and talking about their everyday lives, but they were also thinking about futures and the kinds of futures that way they were expecting and hoping for and dreaming for. So all that input is taken along, and then I try to involve and bring together all kinds of different stakeholders. So I have an architect talking to a clothing designer and a policy maker in the same workshop, where maybe they do a role play around living at night, for example. And this really triggers conversations and also brings them to collaborate in new ways.
Fabulous, thank you. And Valerie, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Coming from a hot climate area, I'm in Israel. I also wondered if there was any alternative way of thinking about an alternative to air conditioning in every dwelling, which is what's happening here, of course. And I wondered if you considered in your alternative responses encouraging people or attracting people to go to an air-conditioned public communal area rather than increasing the distribution and use of air conditioning in every single home. Would you think about encouraging activities in public facilities like the library or the community center, or even creating a temporary facility like an air-conditioned location at a crossroads or public open space?
No, indeed, this is very good input. And like one of the things to reflect on this set of design fictions is that it's never going to be complete. Like there's always more ideas that you can get from them. One of the things we did was analyze them to identify different tendencies that maybe were in them as a set. And one of them is a space-oriented dimension. So examples of that were the collective sleeping. So that was a scenario in which people would go to a cooled space for sleeping. But I also know of examples in Australia, for example, where I think cinema tickets are handed out on very hot days to help people find a cool space. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you ever so much. And thank you, Valerie, for your question as well. Oh no, we've still got time for one more question if anyone has one. We have 1 more minute. There's quite a lot of chat as well, Lenneke.
Yeah, I was trying to look at that. But...
Oh, it looks like it's Marlyne and Ginny, actually. Anyone else with one brief question? And otherwise, we will hang on to our minutes and see whether we've got time to come back at the end. All right, so we'll
I can ask. Well,
go on then, Marlyne, go on.
I can ask a quick one. Lenneke, you know how at the beginning you explained that you are in these different institutions and keeping your eye out on these different, actors, and then your interventions, they are, more around students. How to bring these alternatives to cooling back into those more dominant
spaces. Is there an opportunity for that? And I love what you presented, and I can't wait to read your report. So I was just wondering, so coming back into like the dominant imaginaries, can you contaminate them a little bit, you think?
Yeah, so I think the cooling patch was actually focused on people in social housing situations, so maybe lower income groups, and the students who worked on that. But that's, yeah, so there is again the co-design issue, like how do you arrange participation? And it's also something I was thinking about, like I think you can get input for ideas of alternatives in different ways. And in my experience, it's not very easy to, if you have a participatory workshop, maybe you get a certain kind of ideas that are maybe less out of the box sometimes than if you work with design students but there is then you get into another area of a particular kind of ideas that are, so to find that combination of that would be really a next step for me that I want to think about, like how can you help people to think out of the box while it's not only trained designers, so how can you make those tools more accessible for a broader audience?
You.
Yeah.
Thanks, Henrique. Can you put your 2 brochures in the chat so that we can, are they accessible?
Yeah, they are freely accessible. I will do. Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love this idea of contaminating future imaginaries. Okay, bear with me one moment. I'm going to try and share the next set of slides, and then we'll hand straight over to Ali.
Yeah, it comes with 2 apologies, this presentation. The first is that for some reason, even though we tried to share slides before and it worked, my computer stopped working. So I'm going to have to do the very awkward Claire, next slide, please. And the second is my voice. Not feeling very well today. So also please excuse me if I have to turn my camera off unexpectedly. It's probably coughing too.
All right. But can you see the slides? They're all good.
We can, thank you.
Then I will next slide as instructed.
Thanks. So yeah, thanks everyone. So we're going to talk about change points, which is, as it says on the tin, a transdisciplinary toolkit to reimagine resource demand and intervention. So I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and Claire and the wider change points team, which we'll come to in a second. Thanks, Claire, next slide. So our starting point, like many of the presentations, I suppose, today is social practice theory and thinking about its role in identifying social change. So we come from this starting point that it is a set of theoretical perspectives. It really helps us to decenter individuals' attitudes and choices, and then to re-socialise and rematerialise discussions regarding social change. Next slide, thanks, Claire. And one of the things that we think is particularly helpful for is in its ability to unpick this complexity of everyday life and to kind of question how everyday life is imagined in professional, scientific knowledges and professional practices. It particularly in the UK and in Europe, I think, and in some senses also in spaces of energy in Australia, there's a lot of people working towards using these approaches to reframe, critically reframe policy problems. And that in our UK context, we have some really great examples of where it has changed the conversation, I suppose, in terms of what resource demand is and how we may want to imagine that. Thanks, Claire. Next slide. But one of the challenges that we've faced within our own project teams is what do you do once you've reframed the question? And so we've had amazing conversations with a whole set of government departments, charities, non-academic organisations across water, energy, food, waste, research within our project teams. And they all often said to us, you know, practice theories are very interesting. We can really see how it helps to reframe these questions, but we don't know what we want to do next. And so I think that for those of us working in this space, what we're experiencing is yes, there is this possibility to reframe the question, but how do we then help professionals, policy professionals and other actors to act differently, to do differently within their work? Thanks, Claire. Next slide. And so one of the things we've been thinking about in our teams is how do we then engage with different types of design thinking and other sorts of professional and academic practices to bring to light some of the insights that come from social practice theory. And so Claire and I have worked a lot together in the water sector in the UK, and we've really started to identify that changing the professional practices, the methodologies, the policy research that they do is a really important place to shift beyond academic outputs and to start. It's more than just a conversation. We need to actually assist these professionals in doing their jobs differently. Thanks, Claire. Next slide. So as part of that process, so we got a series of funding looking at the domestic nexus with led by Matt Watson at Sheffield, myself and Claire at, Matt Watson and Liz Sharp, I should say, at Sheffield. David Evans was at Sheffield, they went to Bristol, and Claire and myself at Manchester. And working with this range of project partners that come from private businesses, government, small SMEs and charity, we really tried to bring design thinking into bringing practice theory into these professional practices. So what Claire led on the development of this change points toolkit, which actually is a workshop process that uses sensitivities from practice-oriented research and design thinking approaches to get people to think like social scientists in how social transformation can be supported through policy and intervention. So it helps them to reframe the problems themselves, but by the end of the workshop process, they hopefully walk away with a suite of intervention options that allow them to do differently within their own organisational practices. Next slide. Thanks, Claire. So I'm just going to whiz through for a moment some of the tools and the workshop processes that we use before coming to a bit of an example around water consumption in the UK. So the process is shaped around 6 tools. One is around problem framing. There's 3 that kind of map different actors and change points. And then there's 2 at the end that really focus on the design and planning of interventions that come from a social practice-oriented design thinking approach. The instructions within the toolkit itself allow facilitators to organise a change point workshop for themselves. It's a bit of a how-to guide, I suppose, a step-by-step of what you might do if you want to host one of these yourself, and an overview of the background research, so as you can see there. And if you go to the next slide, we've written a paper that sort of covers the change points idea, so itself, as well as then the toolkit available on that link that Claire just shared, which outlines the workshop process. And so the idea of using change points, I suppose for some might be slightly controversial, but where that emerged from was that our stakeholders and different partners that we were working with actually themselves came up with that term, that what this social practice thinking enabled them to do was identify the points of change within the system and to kind of map out their sphere of influence, if you like, to then be able to identify where to make changes, at what points to make changes in that system, and what they could have influence over, and where they might be able to bring in other partners to assist them in doing that work themselves. Thanks, Claire. Next slide. Thank you. So there's 3 key sensitivities from social practices that we tried to bring into the workshop process. One is about the connection between practices, so thinking about practice bundles, thinking about relations within and between, and what then enables specific ways of doing. Thinking about distributed agency, so thinking about that it's not just one organisation that tends to have an influence on these changes happening, it tends to be that distributed set of actors, and to get people to map out who they are and who can take responsibility, and also thinking about diversity, so thinking about variations in performance practices there. And I'm just going to whiz through these next set of slides. So there's a set of activities that enable you to trace connections. So what are these change points that may be influenced, thinking about everyday routine, thinking about where performances of practices may have the potential to be reconfigured in different ways, and thinking about opportunities for affecting that change from those different organisational perspectives. Next slide, thanks, Claire. One of the things we're really focused on with recognising diversity, particularly in the sectors that we work in, water and energy, is unsettling averages. So thinking about the little, you know, even in households that have a similar per capita consumption of water, have a very different profile of resource use. So how can we move beyond the averages and to start thinking about diversity, whether that's personal differences or household variations, life stage, life course, infrastructures, geography, you know, life, work patterns, etc. So we get people to sort of map out the doings from those diversities. Next slide, thanks, Claire. And then what we get them to do is to map that complexity related to a specific set of practices, and to then really move into, as we said before, a sort of design process where by the end of 2 exercises, they come out with a suite of interventions that they might be able to take forward in their organisation. Next slide, thanks, Claire. So what this process enables them to do is to really free-frame intervention. It helps to recognise complexity and connectivity and diversity of everyday action. It enables them to be more humble in what they might be able to achieve, but also surprisingly more creative and more ambitious sometimes in thinking outside the square. It enables people to trace connections to different organisations that can really help them do differently. As I said, it enables them to map out their own sort of sphere of influence. We've had people kind of going away and saying, right, I can really go ahead and do X, but actually to do Y, I need to speak to this actor and this actor. So it helps them to identify that sort of, networked governance, if you like. Collaborative processes that step beyond that. It unsettles, they're taken for granted, and it helps them to think like social scientists, enabling these sustainable practices to come forward, whether that's by changing material systems or social norms, etc. Next slide, thanks, Claire. The pandemic threw up some challenges for us in trying to deliver these in person. Claire got some funding through the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations that she's a co-investigator on to take change points online. And while this isn't a something that we've got publicly available at the moment, we do have a sort of online test A version that Claire's been working on really hard, and Claire's taken that forward in an online workshop with Northumbrian Water Group around high water use, which worked really well. Next slide, Claire. And just as I close, I just wanted to reflect upon some of the places that we've used this. So as I said before, the work that Claire and I have done a lot is about thinking about water demands and water futures. And the UK, like much of Europe, is really struggling with water demand balances alongside supply, and having, you know, unpredictable and very hot summers. For example, at the moment, you know, there's a prediction that the droughts will continue into early next year, even despite there being rain. Next slide, thanks, Claire. And I think what the change points process, alongside a set of other impact work that Claire and I have been doing for nearly a decade, has enabled us to do, is to really shift conversation. So before we developed change points, our work was being kind of cited in a number of policy documents about being a space of potential to create change. But if we go to the next slide, thanks, Claire. What it has really enabled, for example, with Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, after they did one of our change points workshops, they realized they needed to invest in, if they were to take forward evidence-based policy, they really needed to invest in different types of policy research. And they committed to a 10-year program of work that used the patterns of water work that I did when I was at Lancaster, that was embedded in social practice thinking. And they used that to create a sort of 10-year program of policy research within their department. So it enables them to think about intervention, but it also enables them to think about what other types of data do they need to bring social practices thinking into their organisation, and leads to different types of investment in methods and professional practices. And finally, we've got a really exciting project at the moment, again, leading from the partnership with Artesia Consulting, who was one of the organisations on the Change Points process, and they've invested in a sort of Innovate UK Knowledge Transfer Partnership, which is a specific branch of the UK Research and Innovation funding that's about, and what we've tried to do is to bring social practice theory into their organisational practices. They're a water consultancy in the UK. They work a lot with the government departments and different water companies, and we're seeing them as a key intermediary for bringing social practices into that sector to create change. So I think I'll stop there, but just as we, on the last slides, we've got a couple of references which we can share if you like. Next slide, Claire. And then I've just popped in, we've got 2 videos as well that we created last year if you want some more info or want to use that in teaching. So thanks very much.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry for the squeak at the end there. I went to try and copy the links into the chat and just skip the slides. Thank you, that was beautifully timed. Again, full points for everyone managing to chair the sessions. I'm barely having to do anything here, it's wonderful. Questions for Ali and I. This is the one that I can't use chair's privilege on, so do feel free to chime in here with any questions you've got for us. Go on, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Ali and Claire. It's really so good to hear how much traction you've got and the relationship that you've developed with policy and policymakers. So just wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about that. You mentioned that on the basis of engaging with the change points, there's been a major investment, as I understood it, in this kind of area. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Claire and I sort of talk about that a little bit in that design studies paper. So if people are interested in that, you can kind of go there for some of the detail. But I think I sort of talk, as this is being recorded, I feel like for about 8 years, I was banging my head against a wall, is how I describe it. Like with conversations where people are like, we get social practices, yes, we understand. And then it's when we really realized that they needed, handholding sounds patronizing, but they needed us to walk alongside them to start thinking about what was the potential for them doing their professional practices differently. But I think where we're clear is like, that's not our responsibility. You know, this is actually then about putting that back on and into those organizational structures and saying, right, you see the potential. Here's us helping you to kind of map out a set of possible actions. Some of those actions are identifying they don't have enough data to get to the sorts of social science insights that you would want and imagine. So in the UK, for example, there's a lot of focus on energy practices and not so much work on water practices. And because of that, there's a bit of a knowledge gap. And so that, you know, DEFRA being involved in developing change points, and then Claire and I kind of going and running a change points workshop with DEFRA and Environment Agency together. It was kind of a workshop light. It wasn't even the full version, really. Really then they sat at the end of that meeting and said, right, actually, this process helps us to identify we don't have enough information or data to take social practices thinking and insights forwards from a policy research perspective, let alone develop new policies and regulations based on this. So we're going to have to invest in this. I mean, that was led by one fantastic heads of Flood and Waters who then left, but they have committed to that still for 10 years. So I think that's a really big win because it shows, you know, that they're doing that differently. And hopefully in time, that might then mean there's some work then I suppose to do to bring those insights into policy design and intervention design in a nuanced way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, that 10-year time frame is really impressive.
I was
I think, you know,
shock.
like that's unheard of in my experience.
Shock.
So yeah, really well done with all that. It's great to hear. Thanks.
Yeah.
And again, we've time for one more question if someone's got one. Yeah, go on, Marlyne.
I can ask one if no one else has one. I don't know. Well, we were speaking, Claire, when we saw each other about the time it takes to do these workshops. And I'd just be curious to hear, what is the commitment that people must make, and how do you convince these busy people to take that time? And are there shorter versions that can also be useful, because I've tried to do something similar in Switzerland, but I'm never able to get more than 2 hours max over an extended lunch break. And I know that for you is not enough. So I'm just curious to know how you manage the time issue.
Do you want to take that one, Claire?
Yeah, sure. So I think when we first started, we were trying to fit a change points process into whatever time we could get from people, it's fair to say. And Ali mentioned in her answer to Anna then that actually this investment from DEFRA came from effectively a change points live, what we were calling a demo, to show how this could work, just immediately took off and became something of its own. So it's not impossible to run something in a fairly short space of time. But what we have found is the depth, and I think you used the word thick, like thick descriptions and thick understanding of practices in everyday life, comes out of a longer conversation where you can involve more people with different sets of perspectives. So the best examples we have of it running are where people have actually given us at least a full day, and ideally a series of chunks or a continuous process over a couple of days where we can actually get people working together and moving about between groups so they get a real sense of like different perspectives on the challenge. And there is, I'll pop a link in the chat in a moment. There's a really nice example from a project on unflushables that we did. So this, I mean, the timing of this beautifully illustrates the problems we've had. In January 2020, we ran a 2-day workshop that involved 30 different stakeholders that are all involved in some way in producing products that end up being flushed down toilets that weren't intended to be flushed down toilets, and therefore having problems in the sewer system. And this 2-day process led to a string of interventions with this kind of collective support for doing something and pushing an agenda on unflushables that really didn't exist until people came into that room together. And I think, so I'll drop it in the chat, but it's just kind of demonstrative of the depth of conversation that goes when you give it that space.
Yeah, the light version is, I think, is helpful in showing how social practices and other everyday perspectives can help to reframe the problem. But I think it's then about communicating that if you really want to think about these as an intervention or design process, you need to commit to those 2 days, which they would, you know, many actors would do that for other things, wouldn't they? So, yeah. The only other thing I would say that, and I think it's a conversation for our broader group, is that, you know, these toolkits that so many of us are designing are basically intellectual property. And I think one of the things that Claire and I have realized is that we could do a lot as a community of social scientists. I think we're creating some really innovative types of methods, like Marlyne yours and Lenneke yours. You know, I think also one of the things we're thinking about is how do we trace and track how other people are using this work as well, and where it's being taken up. I think that's a question perhaps for our whole community. But
I'm going to cut us off really bluntly there before we eat into the time for Anna's talk. Anna, are you ready with some slides for us?
Yep, thanks. I'll just share my screen.
In which case, last but not least, I'll hand over to you. I think you just need to click the presenter mode button and we're off.
Yeah, sorry, 1 second. I don't know why I can't see anything now. It's just gone.
Funny, I think this is the same problem Ali was just having.
yeah, it was, except you got it to share.
It was perfect on the check. How is that now happening to me? Okay.
I mean, I can see these clearly. You might just want to make them a little. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Done.
Right. Thank you.
All right. All yours.
Just, the view is just a bit weird, but yeah, thanks everyone. So my name is Anna Davies and I'm based at Trinity College in Dublin. And really delighted to present this session today, but also to hear the great work everyone else is doing on this kind of participatory methods for exploring futures with sustainable consumption. I think there are a lot of parallels between what I'm going to present today and those of other presenters. I'm going to be talking about a couple of current research projects where we've been thinking a lot about how to work with visions, narratives and designs to expand the world of futuring to include more diverse voices. So this has been driven really by both methodological kind of how-to questions and also conceptual why questions. So I'm going to start with a rapid overview of the key issues with current futuring techniques before outlining these examples where we've attempted to address at least some of these concerns. I'm certainly not suggesting we've got any perfect solutions here, and we're still to analyse outcomes, but hopefully they'll provide some food for thought around progressing a fairer futuring agenda. And just to say that a lot of this work is team-based, and Louise Fitzgerald isn't here today, but she's worked with me, particularly on one element of the Share City futuring that I'm going to be talking about. Right, so global challenges, as we know, from pandemics to conflicts and climate change to biodiversity, have often created great pressures on society to envisage more sustainable futures as a precursor to enacting them. And this has seen a great expansion of future-oriented activities in industry, policy and academia, but nonetheless, more critical questions about the future and who should be involved in shaping visions for it remain marginal. We think this needs addressing to avoid replicating, reinforcing inequalities to ensure essentially more just transitions. And drawing on the framing developed by Finani in 2019, which provides systematic mapping of scholarly research in the field from the 1960s right up to 2018, three main clusters of futuring are particularly relevant, I think, for this session today, of corporate foresight, environmental futures, and humanity at the limit. So in terms of corporate foresight exercises that seek to produce actionable insights for corporate strategies and commercial products, these exercises create real-world impacts in terms of stimulating production and consumption processes, which themselves affect resource use. And we're all well aware of the development of the automobile and how that affected the planning of cities, suburbs, rural areas, tourism, leisure, and more, deeply affecting a range of activities. And similarly, visions for a futuristic kitchen like the Rolls-Royce fridge and the microwave oven shown in the top two images on this slide, developed in the 1950s, supported particular ways of eating at home, which have largely come to pass. And more recently, of course, significant investments already mentioned today around developing alternative proteins and indoor vertical farming technology. These innovations typically address some aspects of our unsustainable food system, yet they're rarely subjected to full sustainability assessments and tend to focus on market opportunities to exploit rather than addressing issues of social or ecological justice. And being focused on commercial product development, corporate foresight tends to work within the constraints of the current system. So in 2019, Mike White suggested that this approach has become what he calls a defuturing project, which he argues is being used to propagate particular systems of production, consumption and disposal, which close down other possibilities. Certainly many corporate-driven futuring exercises allow little space to challenge or test existing power relations and leave dominant growth narratives unproblematized and unquestioned. In terms of environmental futures, then the combination of social and climate, biodiversity crisis stimulated a range of environmental futuring exercises, and these have produced increasingly sophisticated modelling of environmental change, positive thing for understanding complex systems, of course. But some have argued that such a framing has served to elevate kind of technical fixes under the auspices of neoliberal governance. For example, in terms of climate mitigation, environmental futuring has stressed the role of solar engineering, carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen as bridge to decarbonised futures. And these have proved influential in international negotiations by the work of the IPCC, but have failed to engage wider publics in imagining what these interventions mean in practice. And I think this goes back to Marlyne's point about thinking about futures and how people relate to them in everyday life. So as with corporate foresights, the bulk of environmental futures work remains an elite and highly technical activity. And Lee sees governing practices, these types at least, as rendering technical the field under consideration, so setting boundaries and limits to action. And in the case of environmental futuring, this technical rendering serves to depoliticize the environment, obscure uneven power relations underpinning many environmental challenges. And the current discussions at COP27 around loss and damage indicate this approach has had limited success. So moving on to humanity at the limit, that the work within this cluster gives space to reflect on how we might transition towards and live with more sustainable futures. In contrast to corporate foresight exercises, these activities allow for a deeper, wider exploration of worldviews, cultures, and current unsustainable practices as a means to create space for articulating and discussing alternative futures. The examples shown on the slide here include the Museum of Carbon Ruins, an exhibition in London, Sweden, developed as part of the Climate Imaginaries project, set in 2053, where the transition to a post-fossil regime's already happens. You're guided by a curator, encountering objects, including a frequent flyer card and vintage fossil plastic Lego. The visitors are transported to a future where that transition has already happened and a future low carbon lifestyles are normalized, where contemporary practices of consumption are framed as strange and unfamiliar. And similarly, in the Rough Planet Guide to Notre Dame in 2014, from the same project, conceived as a travel guide to a fictional city where the reader is brought into the future through narratives relating to speculative artifacts from a socially transformed future environment. In the area of food, for instance, the guide contains a section on sustainable eating out tips, outlining staff writers' favourite food spots in Asia Town. These are positive appraisals of mystery meat, of low carbon proteins such as jellyfish and crickets, and lab grown meat. The use of the familiar format, such as travel guides here, presents a novel means to engage wider stakeholders and particularly publics with future visions. So a key element of concern with enacting just transitions towards more sustainable futures is that visions which transition pathways are set out to achieve are themselves formulated in a just fashion, so are procedurally just, that consider the distributional implications of visions, and that they recognise the need for a sort of restorative justice that seeks to rectify past injustices. And whilst attention to these three dimensions of justice are beginning to be articulated explicitly, I think today's presentations indicate this. On the whole, it's an area still dominated by elite technical processes, which tend to operate within rather than critique the parameters of contemporary capitalism and have a faith in the technological fixes for problems in the present. So in the two examples I'm going to talk through now, we tried to address some of these criticisms. We've tried to destabilise the view that futuring is an elite activity by involving wider groups in the formation of scenarios. We tried to provide opportunities for discussing the outputs of those futuring exercises with diverse groups. And we purposefully designed visual and game-based scenarios to explore their impact in terms of engaging differently around more sustainable futures. We were inspired by issues of core concern from feminist political ecology, critical agrarian development studies, which might help to address these limitations and work towards more inclusive and ultimately fairer practices. So in terms of Share City futuring, the project examined the practice and sustainability potential of urban food sharing, and we undertook 5 years of foundational, extensive and intensive research to map activities across 100 cities, to dive in depth into 8 cities and conduct qualitative research to identify sustainability impacts and to identify governance barriers and opportunities for affecting food sharing. And we used data from these various phases to undertake a futuring exercise. And apologies for the rather busy slide here, but trying to indicate how the process evolved. So research was conducted with a range of stakeholders, and a Sharing Futures workshop was held with food sharing initiatives, policy shapers and researchers from Europe and the United States to augment and refine our findings. And this workshop created a suite of prioritised governance challenges for the 3 areas of food sharing we were looking at. And drawing inspiration from the 3 Horizons futuring approach, these challenges were combined and classified into 3 possible scenarios: business as usual, a technology-driven future, and desirable, sustainable future. We then worked with an artist collective to explore ways of creating a visually engaging scene to stimulate conversations about what it would be like to inhabit these alternative futures. We use these visualizations to facilitate dialogue and reflection on urban food futures with different audiences, such as a flash fiction competition with young people aged 15 to 16, using the desirable scenario as a stimulus to inspire stories and poems about inhabiting it. We use the scenarios to begin conversations with local authority offices in Dublin, where there's no food policy officer or council to consider food issues in the round. And we also use them to engage people at the Eat the Streets food festival about food in their lives. And here young people played with the kind of Where's Wally to the characters that appeared across all 3 scenarios, and older people compared the visions of Dublin in their youth back 50 years when food growing was common in the city and its suburbs. And overall, the experience was positive in that the images were engaging and inclusive across ages, cultures and expertise. However, the influence and impact of the conversations is hard to track. How did the young people take forward their reflections on living differently in the future? How much influence did the conversations with policymakers have on actual practice, and what kind of long-term impact do these engagements have on publics with busy lives and many pressing concerns? And I think that goes back to the point that Ali made just in the question and answer after her presentation. In terms of climate smart projects, we co-designed workshops and games with young people, games designers, climate scientists and policymakers to encourage engagement with climate adaptation planning. And these workshops cover a whole range of key dimensions of climate change in Ireland and its causes, the predictions for increased flooding and extreme weather events, as well as opportunities for intervening with a range of adaptation options and making decisions in a democracy and under conditions of uncertainty. So not only were young people involved in the developments of the programme, they also got, through the participants, the chance to engage in their own featuring through the iAdapt game. And the iAdapt game is an online serious game where players adopt a persona and become the mayor of Dublin with responsibility for planning to protect the city from flooding. And we use real-scale maps, flood and impact prediction data with a randomly generated voting population generated for each game. We are able to generate a popularity score based on selections made by the players relative to the makeup of the population. And if popularity ratings drop below 20%, the game ends early. Meanwhile, expert advice from different perspectives and sometimes contradictory statements from social, economic and environmental perspectives provided to help the players make their decisions with their limited budget of €10 million per year. And the interventions they can choose are grey and green, but also include public and policy interventions such as citizen assemblies and community adaptation plans, and all have different costs and timelines for completion, which affect when they will have impact. So here's just a schematic of the process that we went through. As with the SSCP project, the Climate Smart process had a number of phases and activities. Initially, we held face-to-face workshops with Ringsend Community College, a DESH school, which means it's designated for additional support from government because it's located in an area of socio-economic deprivation. The school and community it serves is also located in an area of increasing flood risk from sea, rain and rivers. And these initial workshops allowed us to understand the knowledge, interests and engagement preferences of the students and define our own parameters of work. And on the basis of this, we developed a prototype game and sought input from a range of experts that we used to refine and add to our plans. And this included expanding the game into a full teaching module for 15 to 16-year-olds, primarily on the advice of teachers, mainly for their benefit, it has to be said. We've been piloting the module with 11 schools since September and have engaged more than 400 students in various events. And we aim to evaluate the short-term impact of engagement with the materials with pre and post-workshop questionnaires. And we'll do a deep dive into the gameplay data to explore the kinds of decisions made by the players. So both Share City and Climate Smart have sought to destabilise the view that futuring is an elite activity and develop novel means for engaging differently with various groups. And these perspectives have proved important analytical leverage for asking meaningful questions about how futures are constructed, who is involved in constructing them and the ends to which they're put. So such questions are particularly important given the increasing calls for just transitions toward more sustainable futures. And they were productive processes, but still imperfect. Work is still needed to explore the effect of such engagements on participants and actual outcomes. The activities were supported by, in terms of funding, but not embedded within government processes and actions. And we hope to progress our knowledge further over the forthcoming years with a new Horizon Europe innovation action called Cultivate, which is kind of taking up the reins from Share City and will start in January 2023. And we're also waiting to hear outcome of a funding application for Climate Smart, which would allow us to roll out the platform nationally and explore possibilities for versions centering on different locations, such as Cork, for example, or even internationally. And certainly, no futuring processes are neutral, as has been said already today. All are based on a set of assumptions and parameters, and as such, their visions, which are constructed, are positioned in relation to those. So creating more inclusive futuring practices and elevating marginalized perspectives in them is required to support the development of not only more just and sustainable processes, but also the outcomes. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you ever so much, Anna. And one last chance for everyone to raise questions. Who's going to kick us off this time? Oh, go on, Jaco.
Yeah, right. Very nice presentation. The previous ones also, but this one triggered me more, even more. And I just want to say, Anna, that I really liked how you visualized like the external factors, like the sea level rise, the things, and as a way to bring that also into the kind of visioning things. I also wanted to say that there's especially more in the climate adaptation future, there's a growing discussion on marginal or marginalized groups, how to bring them in and what is needed to give them a meaningful role. And I would like to ask you to respond to that, what you may have done on that or may want to do on that. And I also wanted to ask you whether you can say a little bit more about the game, how you managed to bring the visioning into the game, and what kind of results of that has given you, and whether it's really a physical game or whether you have some more virtual reality add-ons or thinking about that.
Thanks, Jaco. Good to see you.
Of those things that I'm also currently working or planning on.
Great. Yeah. No, thanks so much.
May I just jump in super quickly, because my question is kind of connected to Jaco's. Sorry, it's just about the game itself. Once you answer about the game, it is also about the narratives. Like, what kind of narratives are you using in the game? Is it something that is like, what kind of scenarios are you portraying there, and what have been the reactions of the students to these narratives? So it's kind of connected. Sorry for interrupting. So
no,
but it was great presentation. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Thanks. Where we only have a little bit of time left, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to cover everything in a minute, but so Jaco, just to start with yours, yeah, the marginalized groups, we were really, we based the initial study in an area which is experiencing kind of a triple threat. So they're marginalized in multiple areas in terms of the level of risk that they experience from sea level rise and extreme weather events and flooding events, and also socioeconomic deprivation, and also gentrification pressures. So this was a particular area in Dublin, which is most at risk, I say, from future climate change, and we wanted to engage young people explicitly in that. And so they were the ones that we developed the prototype game with. They were the ones that expressed their thoughts, interests, preferences around how we might do that. And we had thought about some fancy like virtual reality, augmented reality, but the reality for us was that that was way too expensive for the budgets that we had available, and so we had to do something which was both feasible from our perspective, but also feasible in terms of the use and the equipment for use. We wanted it to be available to everybody, so it's you can play the game on a mobile phone, you can play it, it's a web app. So you can play it online, and most of the schools that we were engaging with had access to these, and in particular DESH schools, which are this particular designation for disadvantaged communities, have been given, interestingly, from the high-tech companies which are forcing the gentrification pressures, but nonetheless giving them these iPads and laptops that they were able to use. And with our rollout in the pilot stage, we've ensured 50-50 participation between DESH schools and mainstream schools to ensure that what we're producing is really something that engages people coming from marginalized backgrounds. In terms of what we plan to do here, it's interesting. We were involved in a European kind of negotiation and conference on climate education, and there was interest from different areas also to run a similar kind of activity based on real maps to bring things home, to bring things to ground in people's experiences. We're yet to explore that, and I don't know what the possibility is, but we've had some interest from another EU grant called SCORE, which is also interested in forking, that's a technical term, from our game into create things which will work in relation to the project that they're doing. So I'm hoping that there will be life after what we're doing, even if we don't secure further funding for it. And just quickly, Ginny, in relation to your question, you should play the game. You can register, you can do it online. It's climatesmart.ie. So you can go in and you can have a look at the materials and you can play the game. There's a YouTube video there you can watch, which will give you a sense of that. The narrative is that you adopt the persona, that you choose from a selection to become the mayor, and then you have a specific role to deliver this climate change adaptation plan over that period to save Dublin from flooding by 2050. And there's a whole range of scores that you get. I don't think I have time, already 2 minutes over. I don't think I have time to go into more detail, but I'll put in the chat, Ginny, the link, and then maybe you can check it out and come back to me by email later.
I certainly will. Thanks a lot, Anne.
So thank you ever so much. Thanks to all of our speakers. Perhaps we can join in a quick virtual round of applause as it goes in these sessions for everyone that's contributed today. And thank you all for such interesting questions. You are right, Ginny. It was a cozy but lovely and dynamic conversation, which is all we can ask for. Ginny or Stephen, does someone want to briefly introduce the next session?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Claire. Actually, I want to thank you all, particularly Claire, for chairing the session, and all the speakers for keeping their time so nicely. As you know, this is the first part of the full session today. We are now having a short break, and afterwards, in 8 minutes if we stick to the clock, we'll have a very exciting topic coming up as well, hosted by very interactive group of researchers from Brazil, and it's about systems changes. So I don't want to disclose a lot of information about this session. I would like to invite you all to stay here and join us in exactly 7 minutes. So we are not closing this room. You can just close your camera and go out, and we start the next session in 7 minutes, 6 actually. Please be aware that exactly. This session will be recorded. So if you don't want your face to appear on the camera, please make sure that you put it off. The one thing that we ask you is to please mute your microphone. I keep it muted at all times. The moderator or the chair of the session will let you know when it's possible to open your mic for the Q&A. And yeah, if you have any question, idea, suggestion, you can always use the chat, and I'm pretty sure our speakers will do their best to answer to all your questions. So without further ado, I would like to pass on the microphone to Stephen, who will be chairing this session, and he will be introducing today's speakers. So
Perfect.
Thank you very much, and enjoy the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Ginny. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen McGreevy. I'm at the University of Twente in the Netherlands at the moment. Happy to be chairing this session on behalf of the organizing committee of the conference. This session is a bit unique in that many of the sessions are organized by working groups within the CAN, within the Knowledge Action Network. This is different. This is actually a group of paper abstracts that came together and were submitted around different themes, and we chose and selected some of the best papers that we received to put together this session and hear some new voices and new kind of perspectives for the CAN, coming from different places of the world that we don't usually hear from, but also on themes that sort of expand some of the ideas that we've been talking about in the past 2 days. This is the 3rd day of the conference. We have 2 more days here upcoming, but this session in particular is about changing consumerism and changing systems, and looking a bit at how consumerism itself is an issue that we need to be discussing seriously. Also around consumer behavior, especially thinking about the role of diets and veganism, and also how policy can be utilized to bring us into more sustainable consumption production around the circular economy. We have 3 speakers, 3 presenters that will be joining us, which means we do have some time to sort of stretch our legs and have a nice conversation. So I do encourage you to put your questions into the chat box if you have a question, but we'll also have a question and answer session after each of the individual presentations. Okay. With our first presentation, I'd like to introduce Erik Assadourian, I should say. I'm sorry, I butchered your name already. From the Gaian way, correct? And you're very much welcome here, Erik, to talk and give us your presentation. Go ahead and share your slides when you're ready.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, I was supposed to be second, but I'm first now. This is exciting. I want to start this session with a little exercise. It's an exercise that we do often with the Gaian way. Just want you to take a deep breath and let it out slowly. And do that again. And take one more deep breath. Now hold that breath. Hold that breath, and as you hold it, tell yourself over and over that I am separate from Gaia. I am separate from Gaia. Keep saying that like a little mantra. I am separate from Gaia. And as you do, start to feel the gentle nudge in your brain to take a breath, that it's time to let that air out and take new air in. Feel your lungs start to tighten. Feel the need to draw in air. Keep saying, I am separate from Gaia. And as you get to the end of your breath threshold, feel the growing panic, the lack of breath, the need to breathe. Keep telling yourself, I am separate from Gaia. Feel the deepest elements of your brain telling you it's time to breathe. And when you need to breathe, breathe. Take in a breath filled with 25 sextillion molecules of air, of nitrogen, oxygen, water vapor, and other gases that make up Gaia's thin blue membrane. The oxygen, which sustains your body and is composed of the waste gases of phytoplankton, of trees, of plants, and other producers, feel that replenish your body. And exhale the carbon dioxide you produce as a byproduct of fueling your body that actually feeds the world's plant life. And recognize that you are not separate from the living earth that we inhabit. Rather, you are utterly interwoven into this complex system and completely dependent on it for your ability to survive and thrive. This type of breath work and meditation is a central part of the Gaian way. And what is the Gaian way? Well, at the simplest, it's a philosophy. We debate whether it's a religious philosophy. Some see it as secular, some see it religious. We gather together as a community of practice, making it more than just a personal philosophy. It has roots in the Gaia theory, in deep ecology, as well as many ancient and modern influences. All of it is designed to help humans recover their understanding that they are not apart from Gaia, but very much a part of Gaia. Like other religious philosophies, the Gaian way has a community of practice and practitioners who take the practices that we share, the stories, the ethics of the philosophy, and apply them to their lives. Now, I won't go into all the nuances, that would be impossible, but I do want to talk about how this philosophy has helped me and other practitioners to live more sustainably, to be more conscious of our consumption patterns, and to use our time to help restore the living earth. So not just the prohibition side, but the actual channeling our life energy into doing good. So the old handprint and footprint metaphors. And this is not new. Environmentalists make prohibitions and rules for themselves around consumption all the time. I did it for 17 years at World Watch, trying to understand, okay, how much can I consume? How much meat can I justly eat? How much can I travel when is it okay to travel? But it's very hard because there's no social support network supporting those choices. There's constant social pressure to consume more, whether you're talking about advertising or simple family pressure. Today, I wrote an essay for Thanksgiving, just questioning whether we should skip the turkey this year. It's a minor action, but with a bird flu going on, with the costs of turkey going up, with the ecological devastation that growing 46 million turkeys for one day causes, it's a simple action that is it should be encouraged for all environmentalists. But since being a World Watch researcher, I started really questioning how environmentalism was done. In 2013, I wrote on this question of could the environmental movement learn from missionary religious philosophies? Would there be something that we could take from these multi-thousand-year lasting philosophies that shape behavior, that shape decisions, that punctuate lives with prayer and ritual and sacred moments? And I believe that there was. That was an academic idea, and it took many more years before I applied it. But applying it 3 years ago and trying to bring together a small community around the Gaian way has been really useful in shaping my behavior, in drawing others together, and getting that social support to live more sustainably. In fact, about a year ago, Krista Heiser wrote an excellent essay for Gaianism.org on what is green and what is Gaian. Is Gaian just green on steroids in a sense? But she argued that it's a complementary element, that we can have green behaviors like driving a Prius, but something is beyond that, thinking, okay, can we actually drive less, integrate a Sabbath into our week so that we're not using technology on a certain day? Should we just work for the greenest corporations or organizations that we can, or maybe we should be working less so that we have less money to consume with, right? To create those barriers around our lives, and so that we have more time to do good in the world, assuming that there is not a perfect overlap between our work and doing good in the world. Same with everything from food. Is it just about eating less processed food, less meat, or is there a way that we can cultivate gratitude with every meal so that we actually savor the food that we eat? Is there a way that we can fast monthly so that we actually achieve many things? Fasting is an ancient spiritual practice, but it also has lots of support scientifically. It helps reduce inflammation, it improves health. If you fast regularly, you're reducing overall calorie consumption, which is ecologically good and health-wise typically good in our generally overweight society. And if we can actually integrate that fasting into natural cycles, we can actually start drawing attention to things that we've forgotten. Some of you may know that it is a waning gibbous moon today, but most of us have no knowledge of the moon cycle. More of us might know right now, just because there was not only a full moon on the American election day, but an eclipse. So it was a little bit drawn into the media's attention. But most of the time, we're looking down at our phones or our computer screens, rather than reveling in this natural monthly cycle that, unlike the seasons, everyone in the world shares. If it's a full moon here, it's a full moon in the Southern Hemisphere, and we're linked by that moon. So to actually sacralize the new moon and the full moon cycle by having a fast, it achieves a lot. For me, it makes food taste better. It shows me that I can actually, restrict my calories once in a while. And for a sustainability researcher who has looked at the dangerous trends for the last 2 decades, there will be a time in most of our lives, most likely, where food becomes harder to come by. And to practice not having enough in a safe space is another benefit, right? To be kind of conscious and value the food, but also to know that you can go a day and be okay. Beyond diet, and so I'm just kind of going through some of the different aspects of this philosophy that have direct influences on our consumption patterns and our choices. One of the important elements is to re-sacralize or mark the travel that we do every year around the sun in sacred ways. Part of that is, adding strength to holidays like Earth Day, but especially we're talking about the wheel of the time. Recognizing that there are days, 4 days of the year, the equinoxes and the solstices, that are truly special. So special that most religious holidays are built off of these. Whether you're talking about Yuletide or Christmas or Easter or Halloween, All Hallows Eve, recognizing those shifts in light were so central to our survival and to our well-being that many cultures around the world had what's called a wheel of the year, with the 2 solstices, 2 equinoxes, and in between those, the cross-quarter days. So we've given a Gaian twist to some of that, having a silence fast in the most energetic summer solstice day, a spring germination fast where you plant seeds at the spring start and fast until those seeds germinate, so that your nourishment is dependent on the nourishment of and the care of those seeds, directly connecting you to that earth cycle. We also cultivated a new made-up holiday called Do Nothing for the Climate Day. We've celebrated it twice now in May. It's in between Earth Day and World Environment Day. Just a day to literally not do anything for the climate, right? We're constantly burning out young activists, old activists, environmentalists, because we're expecting to save the world. And in reality, we need to slow down sometimes to focus on, yes, our mental well-being, but really just start cultivating that relationship with the nature around us, to celebrate those daily cycles, all the life around us. And of course, all lives are punctuated by rites of passage. We're born, many of us choose to marry or to bond with another individual. We have a child, we die. There's no stopping that. And so we actually talk a lot about death. Death is not just an ecological travesty in consumer cultures with the embalming and the expensive caskets and the burying a body in a pesticide-laden field, but it's also deeply disconnecting to the earth. We are part of the earth, and we literally return to the earth and fuel new life. So the seeds of new life, except when we're embalmed and turned into toxic waste and jammed into a plastic vault under the ground. So to recognize both the beauty of the fact that at the end of our lives, we return to that larger self that we're part of and connect with it, even if unconsciously, even if not, in a magical reincarnation way or heaven way, just the fact that we are part of a living cycle that has been unbroken for billions of years, and hopefully will continue to be unbroken for another several billion years. That's beautiful, and it's something that shouldn't create such existential angst as it does. So talking about death and coming to terms with death is an important thing, especially as, again, not to be millenarian in any sense, but death rates could increase quite a lot as climate change disrupts things, as new pandemics form and all of that. So coming to terms again in a safe time to recognize that death is a natural part of life is important. We also have looked at the other rites of passage, but for time's sake, I will not go too much into that. Meditation, I think, is one of the elements of this philosophy that I think is most important and most overlooked. On the one hand, you could say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with consumption. On the very simplest, you could argue back that if you're meditating for 10 or 20 minutes a day, that's a little bit less electricity used if you were going to watch television instead or surf on your phone. But it's more than that. The scientific data now on meditation, creating mindfulness, creating a sense of being present rather than searching for future desires or consumption and all that, there's clear. There's a whole ancient wisdom as well around meditation as well. And the Gaian way of meditating is slightly different. It's outdoors. It's always in nature. You can meditate inside, but that's not the same. And if you go outside, and it doesn't need to be any place fancy, it doesn't need to be in a forest, it can be on your back step like I do. And I see one tree 365 days a year throughout the seasons, with its leaves, without its leaves, with birds, with squirrels, to see that more than human world, to be part of that, to watch the squirrel come up to me and say, what are you doing? I'm trying to bury some acorns in your planters here, and yet not being that afraid of me, just being present. It's a very different type of meditation than being inside and meditating only there. And it also just creates that quietude that is so important in sustaining whatever work you're doing, whether that's activism or research, to actually remind yourself that you are connected to this living planet rather than just trying to fight and save the world and save people. It softens everything. And then finally, just to ground this in reality, because we have a small internet-based community and we gather often, but ultimately I agree with John Michael Greer, where he notes very vociferously that the internet is a very fragile thing. It's very ecologically devastating. It depends on huge supply chains. And if you don't root things locally, they're not going to necessarily last. So we have made it very important to try to root this locally. Right now we have 3 local guilds and a few under development, one in Honolulu, one in New Orleans, and one where I live in Middletown, Connecticut. And the idea of these are to cultivate and sustain earth-centric spiritual practices. So we go weekly into a forest to meditate together, and the aspirational is to support community members to serve the earth and their communities better, to help raise children as Gaians, like with all churches, create mutual aid circles to help us navigate the challenges ahead. I put collapse on the screen, and that's a shorthand, probably accurate. And we're to develop mutual aid circles, people you trust and have interdependency on now. Again, like fasting, it could be preparatory for the challenges ahead. And ultimately, what this is about at the very center, at the very core, is to help sow an earth-centric civilization out of the consumer debris that eventually will fall apart and settle. It's the question is whether an authoritarian or a corporate centric, or what comes out of the chaos that that climate change and other environmental unraveling brings, and cultivating intentionally an ecocentric or an earth-centric practice hopefully will create an alternative. Obviously, very aspirational, very low odds of success, but it's been quite broadening in kind of cultivating this philosophy over these last 3 years, and drawing together a community of those who want to really live a Gaian, not just green lifestyle. So I will end there. I hope I'm not too over time, and just leaving you with some of the upcoming events that you are always invited to join if that would be of interest. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Erik. One's clapping virtually for you. Are there any questions or reactions? I see Thomas has written in the chat. Thomas, did you want to read your comment aloud or share your thoughts?
Yeah, I just said that basically I feel that Erik is right. There's a spiritual black hole in the sort of late modern worldview, a hole that's been really noted long ago, you know, in the romantic movement already, in the counterculture movement, and in many other ways. You know, people just saying that purely relying on reason and not paying any attention to the heart, where our heart is, doesn't really work. It's not enough. It's not balanced. There's nothing wrong with reason. We don't need to go to the other extreme. You know, we can very much be scientists and still appreciate nature in a very, very deep way. Certainly for myself, I think I certainly am able to do that, and, you know, retain my love of science, and at the same time connect to nature in that deep way, and frankly just love it, you know, love it for its beauty, its amazing complexity, which borders on the miraculous, even from a scientific perspective. And there's always so much more to discover, and also about the nature in us, because we're really a part of it so much, like Erik says. And without that awareness, I don't think people are going to be willing to change, but with it, they will be willing to change. So it is quite important. And I'd like to point to the fact that there's a huge movement, even in the so conventional religions, apart from eco-spirituality, which this is, but even in the conventional religions like Islam and Christianity, you have this sort of green wave as well. I've written about that, and it's quite strong. I looked at it in Indonesia, and you have all these green pesantrens or boarding schools, Islamic boarding schools, that try to be sustainable and really passionate about it too. So, you know, it's interesting. There's some movement in that area, and it's much needed. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful comment that needs no expansion. Thank you, Professor.
Great. Any other questions or reactions from the audience? Yeah, I mean, Erik, for me as the chair, you know, I really was impacted. I felt that your message is something that, yeah, in today's society is something really needed. And it reminded me a bit of, there's some work by Mike Maniatis years ago about the politics of sacrifice, how some people see this, you know, taking the idea of consumerism and consumption, and the idea that we are always on this treadmill of kind of consuming, and that gives us something, or fills this hole, the spiritual hole. And I'm wondering, in your experience, you know, with people in the movement, how they overcome that sense of, you know, that they're sacrificing something, you know, by taking these steps, or they're losing something, but in a way, of course, they're gaining so much more. But this the way in which they sort of have to take that step to change the way they, you know, see themselves, you know, related to nature, and so that this move towards, you know, sort of seeing nature in a different way isn't seen as sort of a sacrifice away from this high consumption sort of lifestyle. Do you find that people, or even your own experience, how do people make that step into a different way of seeing themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's like a tipping point, right? It's gradual, and then suddenly it shifts, right? I don't personally, I didn't feel like there was sacrifice. I mean, in the beginning, going outside every morning to meditate was a chore, but now when I don't go out, it's painful, right? I mean, not bad painful, I can move on, but it really punctuates my day, and it gives me a centeredness that I would miss. So, I think I'd give two quick stories. One, personally, I mean, I think constantly recognizing and connecting with this larger Earth system, not in a magical way. I'm not trying to communicate, that I have conversations with Gaia. I also don't want to ever communicate that the living planet loves us, right? I mean, it's a lion, right? I mean, you have to be cautious of something alive and wild. But I got Lyme disease this past summer, and I think if I hadn't had this kind of philosophical grounding, I would have been very skittish when I went back into the woods, right? But recognizing the whole system of interactions between beings, between parasites, all that, recognizing that life is dangerous, right? I mean, all of that helped me to kind of hop back on the proverbial horse immediately and say, you know what, this is nature. Another one, less direct, is one of our Gaian community members lives in Minneapolis. And if you don't know, it starts snowing, I don't know, early October. And she and her partner just got rid of their one car. And they bike in the winter and they bike in the summer. And I mean, the passion and sacrifice embedded in that, I mean, it's beyond even me. I mean, I don't actually know how she does that. But I don't think she sees it as a sacrifice at all. Just as you say, I mean, the mind is very powerful in framing what is sacrifice and what is not. And having a community to support, to celebrate when one makes a choice that many others will poo-poo as oof, that's gross, or if that's a huge sacrifice, is essential, I think. And that's what we miss often in professional environmental circles, is that kind of social support.
Great. I'll take one more question here and then we'll move on. There was a question in the chat by Lenike about she has some noise around her, but she says, I was wondering about the link to missionaries and your thoughts about avoiding some of the pitfalls of these practices, such as a form of what one might call paternalism.
An excellent question, and nothing is risk-free, but I do want to put into context that there is $500 billion of consumer missionary work every year in the form of advertising, in the form of influentials pretending that they love these products and that you should use them too. Not that one wrong makes another wrong right, but sharing, one of the things that I talk about a lot in the context of Gaianism is to, engage with your broader local community, to provide those skills and knowledge that will become so important as the ecological transition happens. There are a lot of things that we have lost, a lot of knowledge that we have lost, and sharing that could be the key way to share a philosophy, to missionize, if you will, in a way that people will come to naturally. This is not a forced, there's no sword involved here. It's hey, we have a philosophy that connects you to something much bigger than yourself, that gives you knowledge that will help you survive the transition that's coming, that helps make every day more joyful. But give it a try. So that kind of missionizing, not the horrors of Christian history, if you will.
Great. Thanks. And there's some more discussion going on in the chat. I encourage everybody to, if you have, something to say, please add it to the chat. But let's thank Erik again very much. Thank you so much for that great talk. And we're going to move into the next presentation by Amanda dos Santos Souza, right? Correct? Yeah. From the I should say from the Universidade de Passo Fundo, I believe.
Yes,
but this is that okay? Good. All right. And we're going to talk about at least one practice that is linked to more sustainable consumption patterns, veganism, and in a context of a farm and in Brazil, I think. Okay. So take it away.
Okay, hi there. I am Amanda Souza. I'm Brazilian. I started training conversation in English. Sorry for possible mistake. I'm going to present this study developed by the author Henrique Derossi, Janine, Medeiros, and me. The main goal of veganism is to be a market force, as adherents active in the consumer market prevent animals from being further exploited by boycotting companies and organizations that continue the cyclical and interdependent system of exploitation. Currently in Brazil, more than 32% of the population was interested in more vegan products. More than 3,523 establishments that offer at least one vegan option in the menu. In Brazilian supermarkets, it's also already possible to find many vegan versions of meat or dairy products, such as nuggets, hummus, kebab, drumstick, sausage, ice cream, and cream cheese. The study presents an overview and indicators of market growth, products and organizations that are aligned with philosophies focused on conscious consumption, vegetarianism, and veganism. This study aims to answer the following question: how to innovate or reorganize a business model in order to serve a more conscious public that seeks a more ethical consumption? The theoretical framework was based on complex theory, Edgar. Complexity, according to the author, comprised at first sight a quantitative phenomenon due to extreme amount of interactions among the many units, and at the same time involves uncertainties, indeterminacies, random phenomena that are related to chance. This refers to uncertainty within rigidly organized system, mixing order and disorder. Cause of complexity in organizations. The cause of complexity is divided into categories. The first of which is human behavior, which includes individual behavior, organizational behavior, and political behavior, communication and control, and organizational design and development. The second is system behavior, which includes the connection system in the organization and system dynamics. The last category is ambiguity, which includes emergence and uncertainty. With the cause of complexity highlighted and conceptualized, it becomes clear the visibility of complex systems, so that strategies and actions can be outlined to solve each problem, which involves complexity, found in organizational environment related to its surroundings. The business model. A business model focuses on the value an organization can create, deliver, and capture. A business model describes the logic of value creation, deliver, and capture within an organization. For the purpose of basic understanding and describing the logic of how a company intends to generate value, 9 major components define and encompass the four main areas of a business: customer, offering, infrastructure, and financial viability. Therefore, the business model framework is divided as customer segments, value proposition, channels, customer relationship, revenue source, key resources, key activities, key partnership, and cost structure. The customer segments define the different groups of organizations or people that the company seeks to reach and serve in some way. The value proposition component explains the package of products and services that generate value for a specific customer segment. The channel describes how the company communicates with L2 and with its customer segments, and then delivers a value proposition. The third component, customer relationship, expose the types of relationship the company establishes with specific customer segments. Revenue source is the representation of the money and the company generates from each customer segment. The key resources describes the most important resources required to make up a business model and make it work. While the key activities component describes and explains with actions are the most important for its operation. The key partnerships summarize the network of suppliers and partners the company has. And finally, components, cost structure describes how the costs related to involved in operating a business model. This study is a case study about Future Farm. Future Farm is a Brazilian startup and food tech created in 2019 that allied food production with technology to create various types of plant-based meat. Currently, the company is the largest Brazilian player in the plant-based meats market and already exports its products to several countries around the world. Analysis of the case with the proposition of high costs based on the models in the literature. Business model relating the complexity in organizations. The validation of this proposed model was carried out for specialists and professional researchers or professional working in the industry. Results. So, the relationship and synthesis of which one was established with the elements present in the information and now the time obtained about the company studied with the business model proposal. Subsequently, it was related to complexity, creating a scale that defined the level of complexity found in which component of the first model in relation to the future farm market. Thus, the interrelational model consists of a matrix where the columns represent the complexity in relation to the customer segments component presents itself with a high level degree of complexity. The behavior of the system as the cause of the complexity in relation to the customer segments components presents itself with low complexity. So, the first model, the business model framework, summarizes and illustrates the business and its operation in a practical and explanatory way. While the second model is a good start point and justifies and proves that entrepreneurs of businesses, like the future farm and related ones, will encounter complex environment and markets. Since it's an environment that often encounters many uncertainties with organizations and the consumer that are evolving in relation to these issues. And it's essential to know the dynamics of the causes and impacts of the complexity possibly present. And considerations. This study contributes to the theoretical advance on complex business models, in addition to offering a complete overview of the functioning of highly complex businesses and assisting researchers and entrepreneurs with the proposed models on the topics that demand new ideas and new businesses. Public policy makers will use the study carried out to foster innovation in new businesses, to encourage and invest in ideas that can contribute to a more sustainable consumption and production system. Limitations, the study, it was single case study and from Future Farm were collected in a secondary way without collecting from the company's managers. Perspective for new business models. Currently, there are around 2,000 Brazilians registered in vegan businesses. Vegan business is investor community. In other words, there are prospects for initiatives for new business model to follow in this segment. But public policy don't have initiatives for these businesses. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Amanda. As everyone here with us, is there any questions by the audience for Amanda? I guess then, as we wait, I don't see any in the chat. I can have, I've got a couple questions. The first was more of just a, maybe a general question just about veganism in Brazil in general. I mean, is it, how is the trend? I mean, of course, you saw at the end there that there's many businesses now, the vegan businesses that are coming, but has it really become something that's much more popular in recent years? And then I guess my other question is about the business model, the kind of framework that you presented on the complexity and things. And I'm wondering really if you were to compare the business model of the vegan business that you did here with the business model of a meat-based, hamburger business, where do you think that there would be a difference in those two business models? I see that complexity is an issue, but I'm wondering if how complex, how different is the business model of the vegan burger versus your regular burger, or maybe a more contemporary or conventional kind of meat business model. So those two questions, Amanda, if you could.
I will try to answer because she's a little nervous. First question. Hi. First question is about vegan in Brazil. It's growing up a lot. And here we have another term that I don't know how it's said in English, but we call flexitariano. Who is that? What is that? It's people that are not vegan, but really like to buy vegan things. So these people is growing a lot here in Brazil. So we have a kind of market that's growing up a lot. And it's important that policymakers and people that want to start new business take a look on this. Because a lot of products, not just eat products, but other kind of products that close kind of personal take care products are really demanded with this kind of appeal. So it's growing up a lot. And I think that with the change that we will live now because of the change that's happening on the governance, this will grow up more. Z generation is really engaged with this kind of cause. So we observe a lot of growth on this. This is the first question. The second question about the model, what is different? I think the value chain is really different and it's complex. Why it's complex? Because we have to start new partnerships, new network to do some kinds of these products. These products need new partnerships and it's difficult. We have to change our way of thinking. All of the stuffs are different. So we use complexity because we really need to reorganize the way that we think, and we need new value chains to do this.
Understood. Yeah, great. Thank you. Great, thank you for that. And is there any other questions out there about this? I have a quick follow-up about the veganism and the flexitarianism. Do you find that the motivation for this is, of course, it's about conscious consumption or conspicuous consumption, so it's sort of the identity that consumers are then valuing in that consumption behavior, or are there concerns about, say, like animal welfare or concerns about health? You know, is it a mix of those kinds of motivations, or is it just sort of kind of an identity thing that's kind of cool to be vegan? Or do you know anything about that?
For some people, it's cool to be vegan. It's cool to buy this kind of products. But I think the health is an important question for people that want to buy this kind of products. And the animal, yes, for vegan, yes, but flexitarians, people that are not vegan and buy these things, probably is because it's cool, because we are talking about a lot of these things here in Brazil and in the world. We have to do more conscious behavior. It's important that we think about we buy. We don't have to buy a lot of things. So it's nice that we do choice that are more beautiful. Let's use this word. It's not a better word, but it's buy things like this. So we have a generation that think like this, and probably is why they are buying this kind of product. But it's interesting to note that this number of people are growing, and we can do systems of production more environmental responsible with this. So it's good that the motivations, hedonic motivations are choosing like this, because we can grow in this kind of business models.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that alludes to this third session a little bit more about how there could be growth throughout the economy in a more kind of sustainable and circular way. Should we move to the third talk of the session? It's on the circular economy and what role public policies play. Guilherme, are you ready?
Yes, just a moment.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and share your screen when you're ready.
Yes. It's okay?
Perfect.
Okay.
Great.
So, first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Guilherme. I'm also from Brazil. I'm a master's degree student on business administration program this study is not done yet. So here I bring to discuss some preliminary results, but I think it's already a good topic to talk about. So as we already know, circular economy proposed a system to overcome the linear system, because this take, make, dispose system, it's not sustainable anymore. So became more and more unsustainable. So circular economy came to not to break, but to change this new pattern. On circular economy, the value of the products is maintained for as long as possible in the economy. And with this take, make, dispose, we know that after the consume, the product ends. So we don't have more useful, we don't have more ways to keep this product in life, in using this product as useful. So many authors support the importance of the circular economy index to the local government policy in order to help to develop of a sustainable economy and guarantee better lifestyle to the citizen. And when we talk about circular economy, mostly in public policy, we need to talk about lifestyle, because changing lifestyles, we can change the system of the economy being too circular in this case. So lifestyles became an important word in our study. Also, the researchers, not almost, but a lot of, says that policymakers need to talk, need to debate with business community and scientific community. So with these discussions groups, for example, they can create some strategy to implement circular economy. And after that, we have created the goal of this study, that it was identifying how public policy can simulate circular economy practice in Latin America. The method, we use a systematic literature review with a qualitative approach. We've choose Cielo from the systematic literature because it is a Brazilian database, almost 500,000 available documents with articles in Latin America, Caribbean countries, South Africa, Spain, and Portugal. But from this study, we chose only Latin America countries. So after the first research, we found 71 articles, and we use inclusion and exclusion criteria to look into the more specific articles. So when the article was specifying keyword exists as a whole, or at least in title, keywords or abstract section of the paper, we include a study that presents piece of evidence on trade-off studies, we include paper that are from Latin country, we include. The paper should be written in Spanish, Portuguese, or English, and be published, being published between 2020 and 2022. After that, paper whose are duplicated, we decide to exclude. So one, paper that are not accessible, paper review paper, gray literature, and metadata articles also was excluded, and paper in which circular economy is not focused, also we use the exclusion criteria. From the methodological step in the first stage, after the definition of the research question and the definition of the database and the research terms that was economia circular in Spanish and Portuguese has the same grammatical structure, and circular economy in English. In the second stage, we found the 71 articles, and after our preliminary selections, result in 62 articles. In the next stage, we have done the content evaluation on 48 articles, and 9 articles who has public policy as principal goal of the study. We have choose to the second analysis. And the last stage was the data extraction and the result synthesis with inductive and deductive approach, who gives us the possibility to create categories of analysis of circular economy and public policy. So here I choose to bring this table because I think it's important us to see even if this study is not a quantitative approach, it's important to see how many articles have been divided between these categories that we have created. So the most category cited was waste management, and after that was management model. We can see that public policy was the fourth. Waste management was articles who shows ways in which waste receive a new destination, like development of new products or improvement and management strategy. Management model presents indicators that involve management, waste, raw material, transport, and viability. Development a new product presents model proposal and viability studies. And the public policy focus on this study was actions for the circular economy in public environment, like cities, states, or countries. So, overview about the public policy in Latin America show us that public policy with circular economy, the articles talk about laws, about what the government has, what the councils have created in law field, public management and project development. Interesting topic to talk. It's about the European influence who creates important international movement who has become more shy here in Latin America, but it's growing up. And this instigate international trade because these international articles who became cited in these Latin American articles show the importance of this international trade using innovation, using research, and principal knowledge exchange. What the other countries has developed as laws or as project to bring here to Latin America and evaluate if can be developed here or need to be changed or has this overview. And the biggest part of the articles it's about solid waste in mainly in construction and electronic field. And to answer the main question, that is how public policy can stimulate circular economy practice in Latin America, it was possible to us to create some topics that can help this public policy, like educate. The first one was educate, because people need to be educated for CEO, because educated people tend to engage for circular economy. So educate and engage has a close definition. Research, here we have the importance of university, for example, because educational institution should experiment, should analyze and evaluate the circular economy practice. Also innovate, creating a public strategy using this research result. To invest, in research, promotion of eco-design, in tax reduction, in recycling, and sustainable production process. To reflect using this data to analyze action and policy to understand if benefits are being attracted or not, and know what is happened, and exchange knowledge. The last one is to discuss, because we need to use this data, we need to use this international study to discuss with the society, with the community, the business community, the scientific community, to look into our city, our state, our region, our country. And the final consideration is that this study serves as theoretical guidelines for policymakers to understand how to develop circular economy strategy, because this strategy are aimed at waste treatment and not at policy of changing the product's life cycle change, because this is it's a big problem and in all the literature, but here in Latin America even more. It's a problem that year by year it's possible to us to change, but we need to talk a little more with this topic. Public policy needs to be aware of the importance of this topic and be open to change, because when we talk about post-consumption or even in consumption, in the result of the circular economy into people, into citizens, we are talking about life change. We are talking about change a little bit day by day, but we are talking about lifestyles who need to be changed. And here we have the articles that I found. And that is, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Guilherme. I think that was excellent. Nice overview, and the literature review of this kind of interface between circular economy and the sort of Latin American context, I think, is quite interesting for the community here. Not many of us are so aware of what the concerns are, what's on the agenda, and everything like this. So I have a couple questions, but I wanted to see if there's any other questions in the audience. Yeah, go ahead, Ginny.
Yeah, I actually have some questions. Oh, hi there. I just sent my daughter to watch TV as well. So because not long ago, I also did a literature review of gamification for the circular economy. You know, it's a kind of a similar approach to see like, okay, what is happening in the circular economy? And I mean, I'm a gamification scholar. So for me, the question was more about like how actually is gamification supporting the circular economy? And my conclusions are pretty similar to yours. And even though it comes from a kind of a different field or like discipline. And one of the things that caught my attention of what you said right now is like the importance of education. And something that this research showed was that the most of gamification experiences or experiments using for the circular economy are for education. The only problem, or let's call it like this, the main limitation is that they're just having this very narrow mindset of what the circular economy is about. It is all about recycle, separate your garbage. And there is like, they are overlooking the entire circularity that is out there, particularly the social aspects related to it. Like, you know, you need to be engaged, you need to be motivated. So I don't know if, for example, in the context of your research is like, okay, what kind of proposals are there to move on? Like you already have this map of what is needed. So it's like, what would be your next step? What would be like, you know, I don't know, like you guys are on the verge of starting with a new government next year. So what would you suggest to Lula, for example, like, hey, you have to put this in the agenda for move on. Like, what do you think are the next steps for bringing the circular economy to the next level?
I think that the next step is already like to keep researching, because we don't have so much data, like what already has happening in our country to help circular economy. We don't have an agenda, for example, like from the federal government, like to propose like a model system to cities, to states, like, or even to business model. We don't have nothing about it here in Brazil, talking here in Brazil, because it's my country, right? So I know that Colombia has this law material that talk about to promote circular economy into business model, but it's not like a big one. So it's smart, it's small, but I hope next year we could debate this with our new government, and hope with a new environment section in the government could create this preliminary debate. So after that, after we know everything that is happening here, we could create some strategy in projects or even in law.
And we know that a lot of stakeholders are important to work to do circular economy, but we need that the government help us to do this. And in the last 4 years, it was terrible for us. Research we do research because we really love to do research, but it was terrible. And in environmental area, it was terrible to do it. It's really terrible. So now we are very hope that things will be better, and we need policies to do better business models, for an example, because the other case that we talk about after Guilherme's presentation, it's one private initiative that if we have some more publics incentives, a lot of new business, new engagement, consumer engagement, education will happen, because it's individual initiatives that are happening here now, and these don't work. This doesn't work. We need a policymaker. The policymaker that help us to do better things, because a lot of things we can do with circular economy, but now in the way that we are.
Yeah, you need a political framework. I don't want to interrupt, Erik, just to conclude with these thoughts. Sorry, I see your hand up. It's just something that may be helpful, because that's also part of what we were discussing with my group when we were doing this study, is like how to get the buy-in from like mainly big players like corporations that are already implementing the circular economy, that they have like all these take back policies and all that stuff, because they can help to make a little bit of a push on the governmental side, you know. For what we found some counter arguments that were like, there will be some pushback from businesses because they don't want. But if you come to see that a lot of businesses are actually like on the corporate side or like on the large scale advocating for circularity and so on, kind of it can trickle, you know, like it can be like, okay, this business that is also operating in Brazil, how can it help to push this legislation, because it's a kind of a win-win situation for them. But of course, great research and best of luck pushing forward, because as you said, it's just kind of starting to get the cogs in motion. And then, yeah, I'm shutting up now. So Erik, please go ahead with your question.
No, I think it's a compliment, maybe a compliment, Ginny, in the sense that, yes, some corporations might be driving the circularity, but I also fear the greenwashingness of calling everything circular. You know, for me, in the context of economic degrowth, almost a spiral in a sense, right? So we're degrowing towards a circular economy at a much smaller scale is the optimal. You know, because just the last 2 weeks ago, there was some big announcement by some wind turbine company that they can now, their blades are now circular. And then once you dig into the announcement, you can make suitcases and other things from it, right? That's not circular, that's, downcycling. Yes, maybe better than what could be done. But so my question is ultimately, did you notice in those 71 studies any linkage between reduction in consumption or economic degrowth or some sort of recognition that circularity is a solution as we shrink down overall economic throughput?
Actually, no, I've found nothing about it. And it's a topic that I actually like because we have a way to diminish the growth consumptions and not to grow economically. So it has a way to do this, but I don't have found in any studies.
So the idea of degrowth has not yet reached Brazil. I guess that's maybe you're just not aware, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Probably because we are markets researchers. We study consumer behavior, how people buy things, and in this area we talk about people will not buy more. No, people will do better choice. So
better
how
choices,
people buy products that have little impact. I know that is a great idea, but it's in the way that we could work. We study consumer behavior a lot. For what? For why? To know consumers and think, so I can offer this product with this kind of characteristics, and they will buy and do a better choice. But it's like this. So we don't talk about, people don't have to buy. Sometimes in some other groups, they talk about this, but here in business program, we don't talk about this. We talk about how we can do better products, green products, and something like this.
Understood. Yeah, Erik, did you have any other comments? It's okay.
No. Yeah, thank you.
That's okay. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of the session here. We have 3 speakers. I'd like to thank you guys again. And for those of you that stuck around to the very end, thank you so much. Very many virtual applause.
I have,
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just want also to thank our wonderful tech team. They're in Taiwan and they are still here. So that's also, thank you so much, you guys, for your support.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you, Taiwan team.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much to all the presenters.
All right, thank you. And our next day of sessions will be on Wednesday, where they're going to be talking a bit about waste and packaging and the other issues in Taiwan, but elsewhere around the world. So please, if you're interested, join us then. But thank you so much to all the presenters. And there will be a recording of this that I think they'll be putting out in the Slack channel, but also at the end of the conference, you'll be able to get a recording of your video of your session as well. So look forward to that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.